An accident erases her memories. Living modestly, she meets a man determined to help her remember, a CEO claiming to be her husband. And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. In the sterile confines of Seoul National University Hospital, Jisoo's eyes fluttered open to a world that felt entirely foreign. The fluorescent lights above her bed buzzed quietly, casting harsh shadows across the medical equipment surrounding her. A team of medical professionals huddled near her bed, their voices a mix of concern and clinical detachment. "Patient showing signs of consciousness," a doctor announced, making notes on his tablet. "Miss, can you tell us your name?" Jisoo opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Her mind was blank, like a canvas wiped clean. The simple questions sent waves of panic through her body. She couldn't remember her name, her age, or anything about herself. The monitor beside her bed began beeping faster, matching her rising anxiety. "It's normal to feel confused," a nurse said, adjusting Jisoo's foreline. "You've been through significant trauma. The amnesia is likely temporary." Over the next few days, medical tests revealed no permanent physical damage, but Jisoo's memories remained locked away. The doctors explained she had been found unconscious on a rural road outside Seoul, with no identification and no witnesses to the accident. The police investigation yielded no immediate leads about her identity. After 2 weeks of rehabilitation, Jisoo stood at the hospital entrance with Min-ji, a social services worker assigned to her case. "We've arranged temporary housing for you in Yongyang," Min-ji explained, helping Jisoo into a government-issued car. "It's a small coastal town where you can recover safely." The 3-hour drive to Yongyang passed in silence. Jisoo watched the sprawling cityscape of Seoul transform into rolling hills and farmland. Something about the changing landscape stirred something deep within her, but the feeling slipped away like water through her fingers. The house provided by social services sat on the outskirts of Yongyang, a modest one-room structure with basic furnishings. Min-ji helped Jisoo settle in, explaining the support systems in place: a monthly stipend, regular check-ins with local healthcare providers, and a social worker who would help her integrate into the community. "Take time to adjust," Min-ji advised before leaving. "Sometimes a fresh start can be healing." Alone in the unfamiliar space, Jisoo explored her new home. The walls were bare, the furniture utilitarian. A small mirror hung in the bathroom, and Jisoo studied her reflection, searching for any hint of recognition in her own face. Dark eyes stared back at her, surrounded by fading bruises from the accident. Her black hair had been cut short during her hospital stay, and the stranger in the mirror looked vulnerable and lost. The next morning, Jisoo ventured outside, drawn to a nearby flower field. The April air carried the scent of blooming wildflowers, and the sound of waves crashing against the distant shore created a soothing rhythm. As she walked among the flowers, an overwhelming sense of familiarity washed over her. Her fingers itched to do something, paint perhaps, but the specific memory remained just out of reach. The local people watched her with curious but kind eyes as she explored the town. Nobody recognized her, yet something about Yongyang felt right, as if she had been meant to find this place. She spent hours walking through the flower fields, trying to piece together why certain colors and patterns sparked such strong emotions within her. At night, Jisoo lay awake in her new bed, staring at the ceiling. The doctors had said her memories might return gradually, but the emptiness in her mind felt vast and permanent. She had no past to draw from, no experiences to guide her decisions. The ONL. One thing she knew for certain was the strange pull she felt toward the artistic beauty of her surroundings, and the nagging sensation that she was missing something crucial about her identity. Let me know when you'd like me to continue with topic 2, the new life, maintaining the same direct style while building toward the eventual revelations about her true identity and relationship with Sungho. The bell above the door of Yongyang Crafts chimed as Jisoo arranged a display of handmade pottery. After 3 weeks of searching, the small artisan shop had become her workplace, offering structure to her empty days. The owner, Mrs. Park, had hired her despite her inability to provide a complete employment history, saying she sensed something trustworthy in Jisoo's demeanor. "Your hands know what they're doing," Mrs. Park observed one morning, watching Jisoo instinctively adjust the lighting to better showcase the artwork. "You have an artist's eye." The observation made Jisoo pause. These moments of unconscious knowledge unsettled her, skills and preferences emerging from nowhere, with no memory of learning them. She handled delicate ceramics with natural care and could distinguish quality brushwork at a glance, though she couldn't explain how she knew these things. It was during her second month at the shop that she met Mrs. Kim. The elderly artist walked with a slight limp and carried herself with quiet dignity. She spent hours examining the shop's collection of traditional brushes, eventually purchasing the most expensive set. "You chose the best ones," Mrs. Kim commented, watching Jisoo wrap the brushes. Not many people understand the importance of good tools. A friendship formed naturally between them. Mrs. Kim visited the shop regularly, sharing stories about her life as an artist while studying Jisoo with knowing eyes. One day, she arrived carrying a large paper bag. "These are for you," Mrs. Kim said, pulling out premium art supplies, canvases, paints, and brushes. "I have too many, and something tells me you'll put them to good use." Jisoo stared at the materials, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't know how to paint," she protested, though even as she said it, her fingers itched to hold the brushes. "Your mind might not remember, but your hands will," Mrs. Kim insisted, placing the supplies on the counter. "Art isn't just about technique, it's about feeling." The gift sat untouched in Jisoo's house for weeks. She would walk past the supplies each morning, feeling their presence like an accusation. Something held her back, fear, perhaps, of what trying to paint might reveal about her past. Her routine continued, mornings at the shop, afternoons exploring the town, evenings alone with her thoughts. She discovered a small cafe overlooking the lake, where the owner, Mr. Lee, always seemed to know exactly how she liked her tea without being told. One particularly bright afternoon, Jisoo sat at her usual table in the cafe, watching sunlight dance across the water. The scene triggered something, a memory, or perhaps just the ghost of one. She saw herself sitting at a similar table, sketching on a napkin, while someone sat across from her. The figure was blurry, their identity just out of reach, but the feeling of companionship was strong enough to bring tears to her eyes. "Are you all right?" Mr. Lee asked, noticing her distress. "Yes," Jisoo replied, wiping her eyes. "Just thinking about someone I might have known." That night, Jisoo finally opened the art supplies for Mrs. Kim. She set up a canvas by her window, where the moonlight provided natural illumination. Her hands moved of their own accord, selecting colors and mixing them with practiced ease. As she worked, tears fell silently onto the canvas, creating unexpected patterns in the paint. The image that emerged was abstract, a swirl of blues and grays that seemed to capture the essence of her confused emotions. It wasn't technically perfect, but its raw emotion that surprised even her. When Mrs. Kim saw it the next day, she smiled knowingly, but said nothing. Life in Yangyang began to take on a rhythm. The townspeople accepted Jisoo as one of their own, never pressing her about her past. She learned to navigate her new identity, not as a blank slate, but as someone gradually discovering herself through small daily revelations. Yet beneath the surface of this peaceful existence, questions lingered. Why did certain customers at the shop give her strange, almost knowing looks? Why did Mrs. Kim sometimes watch her with an expression that bordered on guilt? And why did she feel such strong emotion when handling particular pieces of artwork? The answers would come soon enough, though not in any way Jisoo could have anticipated. For now, she continued to build her new life, unaware that every brushstroke and every quiet moment by the lake was drawing her closer to a truth that would shatter the tranquility she had found in Yangyang. On a busy Saturday morning at Yangyang Crafts, the shop door opened, bringing in a gust of autumn air and a man whose presence immediately commanded attention. Dressed in an impeccable business suit that stood out among the casual attire of the local customers, he moved through the shop with purpose, his eyes fixed on Jisoo. "I've finally found you," he said, his voice catching slightly.
"Yiso, am so."
"I'm your husband." The ceramic bowl Jisoo had been holding slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The crash drew Mrs. Park from the back room, but she stopped short when she saw the scene unfolding. "There must be a mistake," Jisoo said, backing away slightly. I don't remember being married." Sung-ho pulled out his phone, showing her photographs. There she was, in a wedding dress, smiling beside him. More photos followed. Jisoo in an art studio, surrounded by large canvases. Jisoo and Sung-ho at gallery openings, their life together documented in countless images. You are one of Seoul's most promising contemporary artists," he explained, his words measured and careful. "We've been searching for you since the accident. The police report said you were found near Yongyang, but by the time I got there, you had already been transferred to another hospital." Mrs. Park excused herself, leaving them alone among the shelves of crafts. Jisoo's hands trembled as she looked through more photos on Sung-ho's phone. Each image showed a life she couldn't remember living. Exhibitions, parties, intimate moments at what appeared to be their home. "I run SK Tech Solutions," Sung-ho continued. "We met at a corporate event where you were commissioned to create an installation piece. You criticized my company's logo in front of everyone." A small smile played at his lips. "I knew then that I had to know you better." Over the next few hours, Sung-ho shared more details about their life together. He was patient, never pushing when Jisoo showed signs of distress. He spoke of their shared love of contemporary art, their travels, and the home they had built together. "I'm not asking you to come back with me," he said finally. "I just want a chance to help you remember. Let me show you the places that were important to us." Despite her initial hesitation, Jisoo found herself drawn to Sung-ho's quiet confidence and the way his stories filled the void in her past. They began spending time together, taking walks along the beach, where he would point out similarities to places they had visited together. During one such walk, they stopped at a small gallery showcasing local artists. Sung-ho guided her through the space, explaining how she used to analyze artwork. As they stood before an abstract piece, Jisoo felt a sudden rush of familiarity. Not about Sung-ho, but about the way he described the interplay of light and shadow. "Your work was different," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "You painted emotions rather than scenes. Critics called your style raw humanity on canvas." The next day, Sung-ho took her to a larger gallery in a neighboring city. As they walked through the entrance, Jisoo froze. There, hanging on the far wall, was a massive canvas bearing her signature. The painting depicted a storm of red and gold, with undertones of darkness that seemed to pulse with life. "This was your last piece before the accident," Sung-ho explained softly. "You called it Unspoken Truths." Jisoo approached the painting slowly, her heart pounding. Something about the brushstrokes felt intimate, like reading entries in a diary she didn't remember writing. The emotions captured in the piece were intense, almost violent, far from the peaceful life she'd been living in Yongyang. As she stood there, tears sliding down her cheeks, she felt Sung-ho's hand slip into hers. The gesture felt both familiar and strange, like a memory trying to surface through murky water. But there was something else, something in the way Sung-ho's eyes darted away when she asked certain questions, or how he changed the subject when she pressed for details about the accident. Despite his apparent openness, Jisoo sensed he was holding something back, something crucial about their shared past. The memories started returning like scattered puzzle pieces, each one raising more questions than answers. The first flash came while Jisoo was having dinner with Sung-ho at a local restaurant. He was telling her about their first vacation together when suddenly she saw it, a clear image of them laughing on a beach, the sunset painting the sky orange, his hand reaching out to brush sand from her hair. "The shell," she blurted out, interrupting his story. "You found a spiral shell and said it looked like my painting style." Sung-ho's chopsticks clattered against his bowl. "Yes," he whispered, leaning forward. "That's exactly what happened. Do you remember anything else?" But the memory faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Jisoo frustrated and confused. Over the next few weeks, more fragments emerged. The smell of oil paints in a sunlit studio, the sound of jazz music playing during late-night painting sessions, heated discussions about art over expensive wine. Yet something felt off about these returning memories. They were too perfect, too polished, like carefully curated photographs rather than lived experiences. During one of their walks, Jisoo caught a glimpse of something different. Raised voices, a slammed door, tears streaming down her face as she furiously attacked a canvas with black paint. "Did we fight often?" she asked Sungho. His expression flickered for a moment before settling into a careful smile. "Every couple has disagreements," he said smoothly. "Ours were usually about your work schedule or my business commitments." But Jisoo noticed how he changed the subject, steering their conversations toward happier memories. When she mentioned the black painting, he claimed not to remember it. Meanwhile, Mrs. Kim watched their growing relationship with increasing concern. One afternoon, while Jisoo was helping her organize her art supplies, the elderly woman seemed on the verge of saying something important. "Art reveals truth," Mrs. Kim finally said, holding a worn brush. "Both the truth we want to show and the truth we try to hide." She paused, studying Jisoo's face. "I knew you before, not well, but I knew your work." Before Jisoo could press for more information, Sungho arrived at the studio. Mrs. Kim's demeanor changed immediately, her warmth replaced by careful politeness. The interaction left Jisoo unsettled. That night, Jisoo experienced her most vivid memory yet. She was standing in an expansive art gallery, surrounded by her work. Sungho was there, but he wasn't smiling. They were arguing about something. A piece she wanted to display, a dark, twisted canvas that seemed to scream from the wall. The memory cut off, abruptly, leaving her with a sense of impending danger. When she mentioned this memory to Sungho the next day, his reaction was subtle but telling. His hand tightened around his coffee cup, and for a moment, something cold flickered in his eyes. "That must have been from the stress before your accident," he said carefully. "You were working on a controversial series. I was worried about how it would affect your reputation, our reputation." The way he said "our reputation" sent a chill down Jisoo's spine. She began noticing other inconsistencies. How he never talked about her friends from before, how he steered her away from certain topics, how his stories always positioned him as the supportive, understanding husband. Mrs. Kim's words about hidden truths echoed in her mind. Looking at her recent paintings, done since meeting Sungho, she noticed they were becoming more controlled, more conventional. The raw emotion that had characterized her first post-amnesia work was being replaced by something more polished, but less authentic. One evening, while cleaning her small house, Jisoo found the first painting she'd done after receiving Mrs. Kim's art supplies. The swirling blues and grays now seemed to hold a warning, a subconscious message from her past self. She stayed up all night creating a new piece, letting her instincts guide her. The resulting artwork was chaotic, dark, and disturbingly familiar, exactly like the controversial piece from her recovered memory. Sungho's reaction to this new painting would reveal more than any of his carefully crafted stories. But as Jisoo prepared to show it to him, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was opening a door that couldn't be closed again. The arrival of Youngwoo, Sungho's business rival, shattered the delicate balance of Jisoo's new life. He appeared unannounced at Yongyang Crafts one rainy morning, dressed in an equally expensive suit as Sungho's, but carrying himself with a sharper, more dangerous energy. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said, examining one of Jisoo's new paintings displayed in the shop window. "Interesting how Sungho found you first. Very convenient." Before Jisoo could respond, he placed a business card on the counter. "When you're ready to hear the truth about your accident, call me." Some things don't add up, do they? Within days of Youngwoo's visit, strange incidents began occurring at the shop. A shipment of valuable ceramics arrived completely shattered. The shop's website mysteriously went down, losing weeks of online orders. Anonymous negative reviews appeared online, causing regular customers to hesitate before entering the store. Mrs. Park tried to hide her worry, but Jisoo noticed her making late-night calls about loans and speaking in hushed tones with their suppliers. The small business that had given Jisoo a chance was starting to crumble. "This isn't a coincidence," Sung-ho said when Jisoo told him about the problems. "Young-woo's trying to pressure you. He's always been obsessed with destroying anything connected to me." But something in his explanation felt incomplete. When Jisoo pressed him about his history with Young-woo, Sung-ho became evasive. "It's complicated business matters," he would say. "Nothing for you to worry about." The situation escalated when local suppliers suddenly refused to work with Yangyang Crafts. Mrs. Park received anonymous letters suggesting that her partnership with Jisoo was damaging her business reputation. "Perhaps it would be better if you returned to Seoul with me," Sung-ho suggested during dinner. "I can protect you there. My influence is stronger." Jisoo studied his face, the perfect mask of concern, the carefully measured words. For the first time, she wondered if his protection was really a form of control. The breaking point came when Jisoo discovered Young-woo's business card had disappeared from her desk. She hadn't told Sung-ho about it, yet it was gone. When he mentioned this to Mrs. Kim, the elderly artist's reaction was telling. "Men like Sung-ho," Mrs. Kim said carefully, "they build their empires on secrets. They claim to protect, but they suffocate. Look at your own art. See how it's changed since he arrived." That evening, while organizing the shop's damaged inventory, Jisoo found an old newspaper clipping that had fallen behind a shelf. It featured a photo of her gallery opening in Seoul, but what caught her attention was the background. Young-woo was there, standing close to her, both of them smiling. Sung-ho was nowhere in the picture. When she confronted Sung-ho about the photo, his composed facade cracked slightly. "You don't understand the full picture," he said, his voice taking on an edge she'd never heard before. "Young-woo is manipulating you, trying to turn you against me. Everything I've done has been to protect you." "Protect me from what?"
Yuseo demanded.
"What aren't you telling me?" Instead of answering, Sung-ho pulled out his phone and made a call. Within hours, Yangyang Crafts received a notice that their lease would not be renewed at the end of the month. "This is business," he said, watching Jisoo's shocked expression. "Sometimes we have to make hard decisions to protect what's ours." The word, ours, hung in the air like a threat. Jisoo realized that while she had been fighting to remember her past, she might have invited something dangerous into her present. The discovery happened by accident. While helping Mrs. Park clear out old inventory to prepare for the shop's potential closure, Jisoo found a canvas wrapped in brown paper, tucked away in the storage room. When she unwrapped it, her hands began to shake. The painting showed a woman trapped in a golden cage, reaching through the bars toward a dark figure in the distance. "That's one of yours," Mrs. Kim said from the doorway, startling Jisoo. "From your last exhibition before the accident. I bought it that night, but I could never bring myself to display it." The painting triggered a flood of memories, not the polished, perfect ones Sung-ho had been feeding her, but raw, painful ones. She remembered creating this piece in a frenzy of emotion, tears streaming down her face as she worked through the night. "You weren't just an artist," Mrs. Kim continued, her voice heavy with the weight of truth. "You were becoming a whistleblower. Your last series was an exposé, paintings that told the story of corporate corruption, of lives destroyed by powerful men." Jisoo stared at the painting, understanding dawning. Young-woo wasn't just Sung-ho's business rival, was he? Mrs. Kim shook her head slowly. "He was your source. He provided evidence of what Sung-ho's company was doing, environmental violations, worker exploitation, bribery. You were planning to reveal everything through your art." The revelation hit Jisoo like a physical blow. Her hands traced the brush strokes of the trapped woman's face, her own face, she realized. She had painted herself as both prisoner and witness. When Sung-ho visited later that day, Jisoo saw him with new eyes. The way he carried himself, the careful calculation behind every gentle gesture, the subtle manipulations in his stories, it all made sense now. "Tell me about the night of my accident," she demanded, interrupting his latest attempt to convince her to leave Yangyang. Sung-ho's mask slipped for just a moment. "We've been through this. You were driving home from your studio." "No," Jisoo cut him off. "Tell me the truth. Tell me about the exhibition I was planning. Tell me what you did to stop it." The silence that followed was deafening. Sung-ho's face transformed, the caring husband persona falling away to reveal something colder, more dangerous. "Everything I did was for us," he said finally. "Your art would have destroyed everything we built. I couldn't let that happen." "Did you cause my accident?" Sung-ho's laugh was hollow. "The accident was unfortunate, but convenient. When the doctors said you had amnesia, I saw it as a chance to start over. To rewrite our story the way it should have been." Jisoo felt sick. "All these memories you've been helping me recover. They're lies, aren't they? Carefully selected moments to make me trust you." "Not lies," he corrected. "Improvements. The truth is messy, Jisoo. I gave you a better version." As they talked, Jisoo noticed Mrs. Kim watching from across the street, phone in hand. The elderly artist had positioned herself carefully, witnessing everything. There was something in her stance, in her vigilant observation, that suggested she knew more than she had revealed. Jisoo's decision to distance herself from Sung-ho sent ripples through the small community of Yangyang. She threw herself into her art, converting a corner of the struggling craft shop into a makeshift studio. Her paintings changed dramatically, no longer the safe, pleasant pieces she'd been creating under Sung-ho's influence, but dark, explosive works that seemed to scream their truth onto the canvas. "You can't hide from who you are forever," Sung-ho warned during an unexpected visit. "Your place is in Seoul, with me. This small-town artist routine isn't who you really are." "You don't get to decide who I am anymore," Jisoo responded, not looking up from her canvas. The retaliation was swift. The next morning, Jisoo arrived at the shop to find their bank account frozen. Mrs. Park received notice that her business licenses were under review due to anonymous complaints. While the shop struggled, Jung-woo intensified his pressure. He began appearing regularly in Yangyang, each visit bringing new revelations about Jisoo's past. He provided documents showing financial transactions between Sung-ho's company and the hospital where Jisoo had been treated, suggesting her care had been deliberately manipulated. "He made sure you were transferred here, away from Seoul," Jung-woo explained. "Away from anyone who knew the truth about your work, about us." The town began taking sides. Some residents, fearful of Sung-ho's influence, stopped coming to the shop. Others, led by Mrs. Kim, rallied around Jisoo. The elderly artist organized an informal coalition of local business owners who offered support, from legal advice to financial assistance. "We've seen men like Sung-ho before," Mrs. Kim said during a community meeting. "They think money gives them the right to rewrite history." Jisoo channeled her growing anger and confusion into planning an art exhibition. She and Mrs. Kim worked late into the night, transforming the craft shop into a gallery space. Each painting told part of her story: the false memories, the manipulation, the gradual awakening to truth. The pressure continued mounting. One night, Jisoo found her studio ransacked, several key paintings damaged. Security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned during the incident. When she reported it to the local police, they seemed reluctant to investigate. "This is bigger than just art now," Jung-woo warned. "Sung-ho's company is involved in serious corruption. Your paintings could expose everything." But something about Jung-woo's intensity made Jisoo uneasy. His desire to help seemed genuine, but there was an underlying agenda she couldn't quite grasp. She began to wonder if she was simply trading one form of manipulation for another. Mrs. Kim watched these developments with growing concern. "Trust your art," she advised. "It remembers what your mind can't." As the exhibition date approached, Jisoo worked feverishly on her centerpiece, a massive triptych that depicted her journey from victim to survivor. But with each brush stroke, she felt the walls closing in. Sung-ho's influence was spreading through the town like a poison, while Jung-woo's revelations carried their own hidden dangers. The night of the exhibition transformed Yangyang Crafts into something unrecognizable. White Temporary Wa. LLS created a maze of gallery spaces, each section carefully lit to highlight Jisoo's journey from confusion to revelation. The small town had never seen anything like it. "They're all coming," Mrs. Kim reported, watching through the window as cars with Seoul license plates began arriving. Art critics, journalists, former collectors of your work. Word has spread. Jisoo stood before her triptych, her heart pounding. The first panel showed a woman in fragments, representing her lost memories. The second depicted the false narrative Sung-ho had constructed, painted in deceptively beautiful golden tones. The third panel, the largest, revealed the violent truth emerging from beneath the pleasant lies. Sung-ho arrived early, dressed impeccably as always. He moved through the space systematically, studying each painting with an unreadable expression. When he reached the triptych, he stood silently for several long minutes. "You've recovered more than I thought," he finally said, his voice carrying an edge of threat. "But you still don't have the full picture." The gallery filled quickly. Art critics murmured appreciatively, recognizing Jisoo's distinctive style despite its darker evolution. Journalists scribbled notes, clearly sensing the larger story behind the artwork. Local residents mixed with Seoul's elite, creating an unusual energy in the space. During her walkthrough, Jisoo began experiencing intense flashes of memory. Each painting seemed to unlock something in her mind. She remembered heated arguments with Sung-ho about her work's direction, his subtle attempts to control her artistic voice, the growing evidence of his company's crimes. Young-woo arrived late, carrying a thick envelope. "Documentation," he whispered, trying to hand it to Jisoo. "Everything you were going to expose before the accident. Your paintings told the truth then, and they're telling it again now." Before she could take the envelope, Sung-ho appeared between them. The tension in the room became palpable. Guests sensed the confrontation brewing and began gathering around the three figures standing before the triptych. "I think it's time we all heard the truth," Sung-ho announced, his voice carrying across the gallery. "About Jisoo's accident, about her art, about everything." But as he began to speak, Mrs. Kim stepped forward, her usually gentle demeanor replaced by fierce determination. "No," she interrupted. "If we're telling truths tonight, let's tell all of them." The room fell silent. Jisoo felt a strange shift in the atmosphere, as if the biggest revelation of the night was still to come. She looked from Sung-ho to Young-woo to Mrs. Kim, suddenly understanding that each of them held pieces of her past, but none of them held the complete truth. The gallery fell silent as Young-woo stepped forward, opening the envelope. "Before your accident, you were preparing to expose how SK Tech Solutions systematically destroyed evidence of environmental violations. Toxic waste dumping, contaminated water supplies, entire communities affected." Sung-ho's carefully maintained composure cracked. "You're oversimplifying a complex situation. 17 children died," Young-woo cut in sharply. "In that small fishing village near Busan. Your company knew about the contamination but covered it up." Jisoo discovered the truth through her art installations in the affected communities. Images flooded Jisoo's mind, children's drawings of sick families, photographs of polluted streams, tearful interviews with parents. She had transformed their stories into art that couldn't be ignored or buried in corporate paperwork. "I remember," Jisoo whispered. "I was going to display everything at the Seoul Contemporary Art Center. The paintings, the documentation, the testimonies. Until your car's brakes mysteriously failed on that mountain road," Young-woo added, glaring at Sung-ho. But Mrs. Kim stepped forward again, her face grave. "That's not the whole truth."
"Hitch either," she said.
"Young-woo, tell her about the insider trading. Tell her how you used her art to manipulate SK Tech stock prices." The revelation hit Jisoo like a physical blow. She turned to Young-woo, seeing the guilt in his expression. "I was going to expose Sung-ho's crimes," Young-woo admitted. "But I also positioned myself to profit from the company's fall. Your art was powerful enough to crash their stock. I had everything arranged. You both used me," Jisoo realized, her voice shaking. "One to hide the truth, one to exploit it." Sung-ho moved closer, his voice softening. "Everything I did was to protect. If you say us one more time," Jisoo interrupted, "I'll scream. You wanted to protect yourself, your reputation, your money." Mrs. Kim placed a hand on Jisoo's shoulder. "There's one more truth you need to hear," she said quietly. about why I really know so much about your past. The elderly artist's eyes filled with tears as she continued. 26 years ago, I had to give up my daughter for adoption. Her father was powerful, wealthy, and married to someone else. He threatened to destroy my career if I kept her. Jisoo felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The strange connection she'd felt with Mrs. Kim since arriving in Yongyang, the way the older woman had watched over her, how she seemed to understand Jisoo's art on an almost genetic level. When I saw your first paintings years ago, Mrs. Kim continued, I recognized something of myself in them. But I was a coward. I watched your career from afar, never reaching out. After your accident, when you were brought to Yongyang, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. The gallery erupted in chaos as reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Mrs. Kim stood firm, one hand still on Jisoo's shoulder, while both Sung-ho and Young-woo struggled to process this new revelation. I arranged for you to be brought to Yongyang, Mrs. Kim confessed, her voice steady despite her tears. I still had one contact at the hospital, a nurse who remembered what happened 26 years ago. When she called about the accident, about your amnesia, I knew it was my chance to make things right. The truth cascaded through Jisoo's mind, unlocking memories that had been buried deeper than Sung-ho's manipulations could reach. She remembered fleeting sensations from her childhood, a warm embrace, a gentle voice singing lullabies, a faint scent of paint and flowers that had always brought her comfort. The accident wasn't planned by either of them, Mrs. Kim revealed, gesturing to Sung-ho and Young-woo. You were driving to meet me that night. I had finally gathered the courage to tell you the truth. When you didn't arrive, Sung-ho stepped forward, his corporate mask completely shattered. I knew about Mrs. Kim, he admitted. I discovered the connection when we first got married. I used it as insurance, another way to control you. The accident was convenient. It gave me a chance to reshape your life without her in it. Young-woo laughed bitterly. And I thought I had all the cards. I never knew the real reason Jisoo was so passionate about exposing corporate corruption. It wasn't just about the environmental disasters, it was about power and secrets, about how the wealthy destroy families to protect their reputations. Jisoo moved to stand before her triptych, seeing it with new eyes. The fragmented woman in the first panel wasn't just about her amnesia, it was about her fractured identity. The golden cage in the second panel represented not just Sung-ho's manipulation, but generations of powerful men using their influence to reshape lives. And the violent truth emerging in the final panel was both personal and universal. I understand now, Jisoo said, her voice carrying across the silent gallery. Why my art always focused on hidden truths and broken families. Why I felt compelled to expose corruption. I was painting my own story without even knowing it. She turned to Mrs. Kim, to her mother, and saw in the older woman's face all the love and regret and hope that had shaped both their lives. Despite Sung-ho's manipulation and Young-woo's scheming, they had found their way back to each other. What happens now? Someone in the crowd asked. Jisoo picked up her brush, dipped it in black paint, and with bold strokes signed her name across the triptych. Not her married name that Sung-ho had given her, but her true name, the one that connected her to Mrs. Kim and to her authentic self. Now, she said, we tell the whole story. Through art, through truth, through justice. But this time, we tell it together. The exhibition that was meant to expose corporate corruption became something more, a testament to the power of truth, the complexity of identity, and the unbreakable bonds that survive even the most carefully constructed lies. In finding her mother, Jisoo had found not just her past, but her future.